Welcome to this deep dive. I'm so thrilled you're joining us today because we have a truly fascinating mission ahead of us.
We really do.
We're going to unpack a highly detailed, incredibly dramatic historical account drawn straight from a massive Wikipedia article about an event called the Sack of Amorium.
Right, which happened way back in 838 AD.
Exactly. Now, you might be wondering why a siege from the ninth century matters to you today. Well, we're going to pull back the curtain on the incredible stakes of this historical event.
Because it's definitely not just a straightforward tale of medieval military revenge.
No, not at all. It's this clash between the Byzantine Empire and the Abbasid Caliphate. But it's also a story that ultimately crushed a massive religious movement, and it forever changed the way millions of people worship today.
It really is a turning point in history. And what we want to do here is move far beyond just, memorizing dates and troop movements.
All right.
We're going to analyze the sheer force of human egos, some truly catastrophic architectural blunders, and this is key, the incredible butterfly effect.
The butterfly effect is huge here.
When you look closely at the source material, you realize that the visual culture of a massive portion of the world today hinged on some very localized, seemingly mundane decisions made during a single summer in Anatolia.
Okay, let's unpack this by setting the stage. We need to look at the instigating event, the provocation that set this whole powder keg off.
The spark.
Exactly. The year is 837 AD, and the Byzantine emperor, a man named Theophilos, decides to launch a brazen, virtually unopposed raid deep into Arab territory.
He just marches right in.
Right in. He gathers a massive army, crosses the border, and starts sacking towns, most notably a place called Sozopetra. And the accounts of this are just brutal.
They're horrifying.
They slaughter the male prisoners, enslave the rest, and commit horrific violence against the captive women. Theophilos then marches back to his capital, Constantinople, throws himself a massive parade in the Hippodrome, and is literally acclaimed by the crowds as the incomparable champion.
Which is quite the title to give yourself.
Seriously. But looking at the broader political landscape, why provoke the mighty Abbasid Caliphate so aggressively at this specific moment?
To understand that, you have to look at the ideological tightrope Theophilos was walking. He was a staunch adherent of a doctrine called Byzantine iconoclasm.
Right, which is...
It was a strict theological belief that prohibited the depiction of divine figures and the veneration of religious icons.
So no statues, no paintings of saints.
Exactly. To an iconoclast, worshipping images or paintings of saints was pure heresy. But the catch with iconoclasm is that it relied heavily, almost entirely, actually on military success for its legitimacy.
Wait, how does that work? How does military success tie into religious art?
In the Byzantine mindset of this era, if God favored your religious policies, if he wanted you to smash the icons, he would grant you spectacular victories on the battlefield.
Oh, I see. It's the ultimate might makes right theological argument. If you win, God is on your side. If you lose, your theology is wrong.
Precisely. Which put an immense amount of pressure on the emperor. Theophilos had reinstated a very active, often violent suppression of the iconophiles.
The people who wanted to venerate icons.
Right, so he desperately needed those battlefield victories to prove to his citizens that smashing icons was divine will. He was so desperate to project this image of invincibility that he actually started minting massive quantities of a new copper coin.
A phallus, right?
Yes, a phallus. He had it stamped with an image of himself in full triumphal armor, wearing a traditional victor's headdress, with the inscription reading, "Theophilus Augustus, you conquer."
Wow.
He was essentially blanketing the economy with a medieval public relations campaign.
That is fascinating. And to pad out his army for this grand PR campaign, the sources mention he took in a massive contingent of refugees from a group called the Kuramites.
Yeah, that's a really interesting twist in the story.
Who exactly were they, and how did they fit into this Byzantine army?
The Kuramites add a really fascinating layer to this. Think of them as a Persian religious sect that had been fighting a bitter, decades-long insurgency against the Abbasid Caliphate.
So they already hated the Abbasids.
Deeply. When the Abbasid forces finally cracked down and crushed the rebellion, thousands of these battle-hardened Kuramite warriors fled across the border, seeking asylum in the Byzantine Empire.
And Theophilos is just waiting with open arms.
Oh, he gladly welcomed them. He even converted their leader to Christianity and suddenly had thousands of seasoned anti-Arab mercenaries to bolster his forces for that raid on Sozopetra.
Talk about a convenient boost to your military. But unfortunately for Theophilos, his raid and, his shiny new coins caused absolute outrage at the Abbasid capital of Samarra.
Rightfully so from their perspective.
The caliph at the time was a man named Al-Mutasim, and the reports flooding in from Sozopetra absolutely infuriated him. Some Byzantine sources even claim Sozopetra was Mutasim's own birthplace.
Though modern historians think that might be a bit of later Byzantine spin.
Yeah, to sort of balance the scales for the destruction that follows. But regardless of his birthplace, Caliph al-Mutasim vows absolute crushing revenge. And the sheer scale of his response is mind-boggling.
The numbers are just staggering.
The chronicler, Michael the Syrian, who provides what historians consider the most reliable numbers, says Mutasim assembled around 80,000 fighting men.
80,000.
Plus 30,000 camp followers.
Wow.
And 70,000 pack animals.
The logistics alone of moving an army that size in the 9th century are they're staggering. And what's fascinating here is how deliberate and symbolic Mutasim's response was.
How so?
Well, earlier Arab campaigns had mostly focused on raiding border forts, doing some damage, and turning back. But this expedition was designed to penetrate deep into the heart of Asia Minor.
A real invasion.
Exactly. Mutasim actually asked his military advisors to name the most inaccessible, strongest, and most important Byzantine fortress. And they pointed to Amorium.
The ultimate target. But why Amorium specifically? Why not march straight on Constantinople?
Amorium wasn't just heavily fortified. It was the capital of the powerful Anatolic theme.
And a theme, just to clarify for everyone, wasn't a literary concept.
Right. To the Byzantines, a theme was a massive, heavily militarized province. It served as the backbone of their empire's defense and economy. And Amorium was the crown jewel of the most powerful theme.
And it had a personal connection to the emperor, too, didn't it?
It did. It was the birthplace of the ruling Byzantine dynasty. It was the birthplace of Theophilus' father and possibly Theophilos himself. The Arab advisors described it to the caliph as the eye and foundation of Christendom.
The Eye of Christendom, that is a heavy title.
It was a massive psychological target. According to the sources, Mutasim was so laser-focused on this goal that he literally had the name Amorium painted on the shields and banners of his soldiers.
Talk about telegraphing your punch. But doing it with terrifying, overwhelming force. Imagine you were a Byzantine citizen hearing rumors of an 80,000-man army marching toward you with your city's name literally written on their weapons.
It would be terrifying.
So in 838 AD, this massive war machine starts moving, and the caliph's strategy is a classic pincer movement.
Divide and conquer.
Exactly. He divides his incredible army into two forces. One detachment of 10,000 horse archers, commanded by a brilliant general named Afshin, is sent northeast.
Okay.
The main army, led by the caliph himself, pushes directly through the mountain passes into Cappadocia. The plan is for these two massive pincers to link up at the city of Ancira and then march jointly south onto Amorium.
And the Byzantines aren't blind to this.
No, the Byzantine generals see this coming. They look at the size of this force, and they advise Emperor Theophilos to evacuate Amorium entirely.
Which strategically makes perfect sense. Their logic was entirely sound. They told the emperor to empty the city, take away the caliph's psychological prize, and keep the Byzantine field army whole and united so they could fight a guerrilla war on their own terms.
But he ignores them. He actually reinforces the garrison at Amorium, and then, rather than keeping his field forces united, he rushes out with about 40,000 men to intercept that smaller northern Arab force under the general Afshin.
A huge mistake.
Why would he divide his forces and risk everything in a pitched battle?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you see the trap Theophilos built for himself with his own propaganda.
The coins?
Yes, the coins and the iconoclast policies. He cannot afford to look weak. He cannot abandon the birthplace of his dynasty. He has minted thousands of coins, declaring himself the incomparable champion.
So his hands are tied by his own PR.
Completely. If he retreats and lets the Arabs burn Amorium without a fight, the Byzantine public will instantly assume God has abandoned the iconoclasts. His entire political and religious mandate forces him into a direct military confrontation he shouldn't be fighting.
So his ego, backed by his theology, drives him to the plain of Dazamon, where he meets Afshin's forces at the Battle of Anzin in late July.
And how does that go?
Well, despite some initial Byzantine success, it turns into an absolute catastrophe. The Byzantine lines break. The army scatters in a panic. Theophilos and his personal guard find themselves entirely encircled by Arab horse archers.
Just a total disaster.
It's a desperate, bloody fight, and the emperor barely manages to break through the enemy lines and escape with his life.
And the fallout from that single defeat is immediate and massive. Theophilus is missing for days. Rumors flood back to the capital in Constantinople that the emperor was killed in battle.
Which is basically throwing a match into a powder keg.
Instantly. It sparks political plots to crown a new emperor right away. But it gets worse. Remember those Kuramite refugees Theophilus had taken in?
Right, the thousands of mercenaries who padded out his army.
They mutiny.
You're kidding.
You have to put yourself in their shoes. They are refugees who rely entirely on a strong Byzantine emperor to protect them from the Abbasids. When they hear Theophilus is dead, they panic, secure their own power, and declare their own commander as the new emperor up near the Black Sea.
Oh, wow. So the Byzantine defense is completely paralyzed by infighting and rebellion.
It's falling apart from the inside.
And while the Byzantines are turning on each other, the Abbasid plan works flawlessly. The Arab vanguard reaches the city of Ankara, finds it mostly deserted, plunders it, and waits.
Just biding their time.
Over the next few days, the divided Arab armies reunite. With Theophilos's field army broken and scattered, there is absolutely nothing standing between the caliph and his ultimate prize.
Amorium.
The united Abbasid army turns its sights south and marches directly on the city. Which brings us to August 1st, 838 AD. The Abbasid army arrives, and they are facing an absolute beast of a fortress.
It really was a marvel of engineering.
The contemporary sources describe it as having a massive, wide moat and a thick defensive wall protected by 44 towers. It's designed to be impregnable.
And, honestly, despite the overwhelming numbers of the Abbasid army, Amorium might have held out much longer. Perhaps until the winter weather forced the Arabs to retreat. The Byzantine artillery was raining fire down on the Arab siege engines, and that massive moat was doing exactly what it was supposed to do.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the Arabs didn't find the city's weak spot by just tapping on the walls, right?
No, not at all.
It took an insider.
It did. An Arab prisoner who had previously converted to Christianity and lived in the city defects back to the caliph. And he exposes a massive structural cover-up.
A cover-up?
Yeah. He tells the caliph that a specific section of the wall had been heavily damaged by severe rainfall the previous spring. But because the city commander had been negligent and didn't want to get in trouble, that section had only been hastily and superficially repaired.
So they basically just painted over the cracks.
Exactly. It was made to look intact from the outside, but structurally it was incredibly weak.
It's staggering to think about. You have this clash of global superpowers, 80,000 troops, the fate of a religion hanging in the balance, and it all comes down to a lazy masonry repair job.
It's wild. But this raises an important question about the structural integrity of empires. So often in history, it isn't the grand strategy of the enemy that brings a city down. It's a localized cover-up of a mundane maintenance issue by someone just trying to save their own job.
And the Arabs capitalize on this immediately. Right?
Immediately. They concentrate all their heavy siege engines on this exact weak spot.
And the tactical warfare described in the sources is just visceral. To get their mobile siege towers and catapults right up to that weakened wall, the Arabs have to cross that massive moat.
Right, which isn't easy.
No. So they start filling it with earth, and when they run out of easy material, they actually use sheepskins from the thousands of animals they brought along for food. They stuff these sheepskins with dirt to try and pave a path over the moat.
That is so resourceful, but so grim.
Very grim. But the Byzantine defenders are fighting back fiercely. The Arab work is uneven, and a massive siege tower actually gets stuck halfway across the moat.
A small victory for the defenders.
Right. Meanwhile, the Byzantines are desperately hanging massive wooden beams over the outside of the wall to absorb the shock of the Arab catapult boulders. But the bombardment is so intense, concentrated entirely on that one poorly repaired section, that the wooden beams literally splinter to pieces.
And after 2 days of this concentrated barrage, a breach is finally made. The Byzantine commander of the city, a man named Aetios, realizes the situation is dire.
He knows they can't hold out much longer.
Exactly. He knows Theophilus is alive but struggling to regroup, so Aetios attempts a desperate psychological gambit. He decides his only hope is to break through the besieging army at night to link up with the emperor. He sends 2 messengers out under the cover of darkness to coordinate a rescue.
But the messengers are captured, and Caliph Mutassim plays this brilliantly. He doesn't just execute them in the dark.
What does he do?
He offers them a rich reward if they convert to Islam. They agree, and the next morning, the Caliph parades these former Byzantine messengers around the city walls in full view of Aetios and the exhausted defenders.
Oh, that is brutal.
Imagine you are a Byzantine soldier on that wall. You are starving, the wall is crumbling, and the guys you sent to get help are now riding with the enemy, telling you that no rescue is coming. It is a devastating blow to their morale.
And that psychological pressure directly leads to the climax of the siege. The defenders hold out for about 2 weeks in total, enduring constant, grueling assaults. Finally, Aetios tries to negotiate a surrender, offering to hand over the city in exchange for safe passage for the inhabitants.
Does the Caliph accept?
Mu'tasim flatly refuses. He isn't there for a polite surrender. He is there to fulfill the vow he made back in Samarra.
And then comes the betrayal that seals the city's fate. A Byzantine officer named Boiditzes, who was directly in charge of defending the breached section of the wall, decides to go rogue.
He just abandons his post.
He leaves his post and goes out to the Abbasid camp to negotiate directly with the Caliph, likely trying to secure his own personal safety. But crucially, before he leaves, he orders his men at the breach to stand down and hold their weapons until he returns.
It's a fatal error in military discipline. While Boiditzes is in the enemy camp supposedly negotiating, the Arab forces notice the defenders at the breach have stopped fighting.
They see an opening.
They see the lowered weapons. On a signal, they charge. They pour through the opening before the Byzantines can react, taking the defenders completely by surprise. The organized resistance instantly collapses into sporadic, desperate street fighting.
It must have been total chaos.
Absolute chaos. Some Byzantine soldiers barricade themselves in a local monastery and are burned alive. Aetios and his officers fall back to a tower before finally being forced to surrender.
The aftermath is apocalyptic. The Arab sources say the sale of the spoils went on for 5 solid days. The Byzantine chronicles report up to 70,000 dead, while Arab sources estimate 30,000.
Either way, it's a massive slaughter.
The surviving civilian population is divided up as slaves among the army leaders. And then Mu'tasim burns the eye of Christendom to the ground. As a grand trophy, he takes the massive iron doors of the city gates.
Those doors actually have an incredible historical journey of their own, don't they?
They do. They are transported all the way back to his palace in Samarra, later moved to Raqqa, and finally, over a century later, they are incorporated into the gates of Aleppo.
But just as Mu'tasim is pondering taking this massive, victorious army all the way to Constantinople itself, the campaign abruptly ends.
Wait, why? He has all the momentum.
Word reaches the Caliph that his nephew is plotting a coup back home in the Caliphate. The politics of the capital demand his immediate return. He is forced to cut the campaign short and march his massive army back.
And the march home is described as a brutal death march. They take the direct route across the Anatolian plateau to the Cilician Gates. Now, this is a high, arid region. In late summer, it is incredibly unforgiving.
Just scorching heat.
Blistering heat and very little water for an army of that size, let alone tens of thousands of captives. Many of the Byzantine captives are simply too exhausted and dehydrated to keep walking. Some try to escape when the columns inevitably slow down.
And the response is merciless.
In retaliation, Mu'tasim separates out the high-ranking officials and then orders the execution of the rest of the struggling captives. Some 6,000 people are slaughtered by the side of the road simply because they couldn't march any further.
The high-ranking officials, including the commander Aetios, are taken back to the Caliphate. Aetios is executed shortly after, possibly in retaliation for a threatening letter Emperor Theophilos sent trying to ransom him.
And what about the rest?
The remaining high-ranking captives are held in Samarra for years. They are repeatedly urged to convert to Islam, and for 7 years, they refuse. Finally, on March 6, 1845, they are executed. They become celebrated in the Eastern Orthodox Church as the 42 Martyrs of Amorium.
I have to ask, what happens to Boiditzes, the traitor who abandoned the breach and caused the city to fall?
He met a grim end as well. Legend has it that he did convert to Islam to save his skin, but the Caliph executed him anyway, alongside the 42 martyrs.
A traitor to both sides, essentially.
Exactly. And the religious legend that grew out of this claims that when their bodies were thrown into the river Tigris, the 42 martyrs miraculously floated, while Boiditzes' body sank straight to the bottom like a stone.
So what does this all mean? We have this incredibly vivid drama. We've got emperors, caliphs, sieges, betrayals, and massive armies marching across mountains. But why does this specific event matter to you and me today?
What's fascinating here is that the purely military impact of the Sack of Amorium was actually quite limited.
Really, after all that destruction?
Yes, it was utterly devastating for the people who lived there, but the Byzantine field army wasn't completely destroyed at Anzin. The Kuramite revolt up at the Black Sea was suppressed without bloodshed the very next year.
Oh, that's surprising.
And the cities of Ancira and Amorium were eventually rebuilt. The Byzantine Empire survived, and the Abbasids didn't follow up on the invasion due to their own internal political unrest. Within a few years, they even agreed to a truce.
So the military impact was a blip, but the theological impact, that was an earthquake.
It changed the face of a religion. We have to return to iconoclasm. Remember, Theophilus' entire religious platform, the banning and smashing of religious art, was justified exclusively by military success.
Right. If you win, God likes what you're doing.
He told his people, God is with us, and our victories prove it. He minted those coins to prove it. The complete and utter humiliation at Amorium, the destruction of his dynasty's birthplace, robbed the iconoclasts of their only compelling argument.
The ultimate proof that God was not on their side.
Exactly. The defeat was so profound and the loss of life so massive that it proved to the Byzantine populace that iconoclasm absolutely did not guarantee divine favor.
Theophilus never really recovered from the shock and humiliation. He fell ill and died just 3 years later, before he even reached the age of 30. And just over a year after his death, on March 11, 843, a religious synod was held that officially restored the veneration of icons.
It was a complete reversal.
Iconoclasm was declared a heresy once and for all. This paved the way for the incredibly rich visual art tradition that defines Orthodox Christianity to this very day. All those beautiful mosaics, the gold leaf paintings, the rich visual culture of Eastern Christianity, it all survives and flourishes because the iconoclasts lost their military mandate at Amorium.
Which brings us back to the sheer fragility of history. This entire deep dive is a testament to how massive cultural shifts can pivot on the smallest, most human details.
It's wild to think that the beautiful art in museums and churches worldwide owes its existence in part to a negligent masonry repair job and a rainy day in 9th century Anatolia. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a different thought to mull over.
Something that connects this distant history to our world right now. Consider the way modern political leaders and organizations operate today. Theophilus tried to cover up his empire's vulnerability by minting thousands of shiny new coins, portraying himself as an invincible conqueror. He used the mass media of his day to project strength, while the physical infrastructure of his most important city was literally crumbling from rain damage because of a lazy cover-up.
The illusion of strength versus the reality of decay.
Exactly. Think about how often we see that exact same dynamic play out today. How many modern leaders launch massive, expensive public relations campaigns or social media blitzes to project an image of absolute strength, all while the actual foundational infrastructure, whether that's literal bridges and walls or institutional integrity, is quietly eroding behind the scenes.
It makes you wonder what modern walls are waiting for a rainstorm, hidden behind a carefully minted PR campaign? Or even, taking it a step further, think about our digital infrastructure today.
Oh, that's a great point.
We rely on these massive tech companies and digital networks that project total security. They run PR campaigns about impenetrable encryption and safety. But how often does a massive data breach happen because of one mundane, unpatched software flaw?
A digital masonry cover-up.
Exactly. Someone didn't fix a minor bug because of negligence, and suddenly the digital gates are wide open. Our sheepskins and splintering beams aren't physical anymore, but the human element, the ego, the negligence, the PR spin is exactly the same as it was in 838 AD.
History doesn't just stay in the past. It echoes.
It absolutely echoes. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's stories like the Sack of Amorium that remind us history is never just a straight line. It's a messy, fascinating web of cause and effect, human ego, and unexpected consequences. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and stay curious. We will catch you on the next one.